Hello, everybody, and a huge thank you for joining us for today's session. My name is Ben Slater. I'm Vice President of Marketing here at Beamery, and I will be hosting and moderating our wonderful panel discussion today. Before we start, just a couple of small housekeeping items. So we'll share a recording of this session with all registrants from tomorrow. And if you have any questions along the way, there is a questions module on the webinar platform where you should be able to submit those, and I'll keep a track of those as they come through, and any relevant I'll insert into the discussion, and if not, we'll kind of come back to them at the end. Today's webinar is part of a broader series that we've been running for the last couple of weeks around accelerating talent transformation with AI. At Beamery, we believe that the talent experiences of the future can be made more personalized, more valuable, and more effective with the right application of AI, but the way forward is not necessarily straightforward. For organizations looking to drive talent transformation through AI, building the right foundation, navigating incoming legislation, and being very clear around the ultimate problem that they're trying to solve is all critical to success. So in this session, what we've done is we've pulled together an all-star panel to really dig into the dangers of not truly understanding the AI that you use across talent solutions in your organization. Black box AI solutions are not only getting a critical look from regulators, I'm sure many of you have seen incoming legislation in places like New York and New Jersey, but they also make it hard for companies to explain hiring decisions and can obviously create bias. So lots to dig into here, really excited, and we have 100% the right people to do so. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome our panelists and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I guess we'll go left to right. So Sultan, I'll throw it over to you first.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm Sultan. I run product, technology, and customer experience here at Beamery, and super excited to be joined by Athena and Adam. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Super, thanks Sultan. Athena.
Hi all, Athena Karp, CEO founder of Hiredscore. Excited to be here on this panel. Think very highly of Sultan and Adam, and eager to dive into this topic.
Thank you, Athena. Great to have you here. And Adam.
Hi everyone, Adam Godson. I'm Chief Product Officer at Paradox, and I will echo that there are a few people I would rather have a great discussion with than Sultan and Athena, and so happy to be representing Paradox. We're a leading conversational AI solution for talent.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. And I guess without further ado, we can get started with our first question here. So, and Athena, I'll come to you first here. What are some of the key challenges you see customers trying to solve with AI?
Yeah, so I started Hiredscore a decade ago, and as one of the first in the space of AI for talent acquisition and talent management, we saw in the beginning, I think, applications of AI in HR use cases really focused in kind of the basics of candidate scoring, prioritization, and sourcing automation. And what we've seen since is a proliferation of just the capacity and the need for AI to fit the ever-growing mandate that HR teams have as they take on not just talent management, workforce decision-making, the extended workforce, diversity and inclusion goals and aspirations. There's just a widening that, doing that manually in many places is both impossible and no one has the time and capacity to do that. So we are seeing an expansion of the types of challenges people are trying to solve. I do think there's two other important notions, which is also the geographic diversification of the applications of AI for HR challenges, where in the beginning it was North America, Western Europe, focused kind of early innovation use cases. Now we see some groundbreaking applications, for example, in disability and inclusion objectives coming out of places like Brazil and Latin America, places like China and India, and just a growth of other regions taking the lead in different areas and verticals of the types of challenges. And then I think that last piece of the absolute need for a lot of clients are held back from the visions or where they would apply AI. to concerns of compliance, explainability, and transparency of the engines. I know that is a special thing we're here to talk about today, but where many would want to use AI to, for example, break work down into what type of workers could do that work and what is the quickest and best option to do that. If they have concerns about bias, or they have concerns about quality, or they have concerns about fairness, they won't go to those places that the business need is driving, but other priorities are preventing that. So an outgrowth, geographic diversification, and a over-reliance or an over-focusing now on the right safety valves in place to achieve that ever broader application of AI.
Super. Thanks, Athena. I appreciate the perspective, and I think some really interesting jumping off points there. Adam, I guess when you consider what Athena said, is there anything that sticks out for you, or are there things that you're seeing at Paradox that you feel like it's worth digging into in this discussion?
I think one of the very natural things that's happening in our space is the reflection of consumer technology, what people use in their everyday lives. I think the reflection of an HR professional going home and using Siri and Alexa and Google Maps, having Netflix recommend great content to them based on other things that they've watched, and then going to work and saying, why does the technology I use at work suck? When things that I use in my personal life know who I am, they're personalized, they can do great matching, and they're really impressive. And so I think that understanding sort of naturally of what's possible, and the extension logically of why can't I use some of this great things to make the life easier for us in technology, sort of at work, starts to lend itself to people thinking what's possible, and then being able to educate themselves and learn and understand and uncover some of the challenges that exist with regulations and other things. But I think the overall technology landscape is sparking the ideation and the imagination of a great generation of HR professionals.
I think the idea of the kind of consumerization of workplace technology is fascinating, and I think it kind of goes both ways, right? It's the candidate, right, and the experience that is created for the candidate via the application of the right technologies, but it's also the end user, right, who, as you said, is logging into Netflix at night and is getting this personalized, suggestions and recommendations, and is coming into a system at work which they have to work, right? The system doesn't work with them. Sultan, what are your perspectives?
Well, I think that what you're pointing out, Adam, is a key disconnect between what organizations are often trying to solve versus what end users actually want and expect. I think, especially in HR and talent, many organizations are trying to leverage AI to focus on efficiency, reducing manual work, which is important, but it makes it easy by focusing purely on efficiency to get tempted into just quick wins on certain types of matching, and to forget about some of the underlying requirements that actually make that matching valuable to users and what users really benefit from. And the reality is that if you take the example that you mentioned, Adam, Google Maps, what technologies like Google Maps do is often simply reduce the amount of cognitive load. AI is used as a new UI, a new user interface that prioritizes focus. There was a recent, in Apple's latest announcement, one of their biggest applications of AI and deep learning was just to reduce the number of notifications, which may seem minor, but is actually a really powerful way of focusing us on something that we interact with daily on our phones. And there are tons of applications for AI and talent and people technologies to do just that, to actually take things away, to simplify things, to help us prioritize who we speak to help candidates or employees better navigate their careers and their options and the content in front of them. In talent, we still use career websites and talent websites, whereas the rest of the world has moved on to personalized applications for each consumer. No two people's Facebook and Netflixes are the same. We all still use the same websites and the same tools that aren't truly personalized in talent and HR. And I think that is a key area of great opportunities for AI to mirror the consumer experiences that we started to see.
Thank you, Sultan. I think there's an enormous amount of potential, and I wanted to, steer the discussion in one particular direction. And I think, Athena, you brought up, or you touched on this in your answer in the last round around DE&I and some of the applications there. And obviously, it's not this is never a one size fits all solution. But if we had to look at the potential for AI in terms of improving DE&I across different sections or segments of the talent lifecycle, what is your perspective there? And I guess just as you flagged it and as you went into a little detail in the previous question, maybe I'll start with you again, and then would love to kind of get the perspectives of Sultan and Adam again as to what the future could look like here.
Yeah. It's a great call out. I think there's two sides of this coin, right? Side number one is using AI. What types of DE&I agenda items can we unlock with product and features that would be impossible without complex, robust technologies like AI? Rules engines, analytics, and manual processes aren't going to be able to compute, for example. We've been working on things like a job writing AI that can in real time tell you what requirements are you asking for in a job, and how do they impact the ability to create a diverse slate for this role. And the reason why you need an AI is because the data is always changing. Your supply and your demand and people's qualifications and your recruitment marketing programs, success and failures, and it's a constantly moving target where that data, as well as new skills, are constantly being added, new requirements are being posted. So if you don't have an AI, you can't accurately do that, or you're going to be doing that off very stale data because of the amount of time it would take to manually process that. So I think on one hand, we're seeing a lot of things related to how can we understand supply-demand dynamics, our own inefficiencies, and the effectiveness of our agenda in certain areas related to skills and qualifications as they shift and as people's skills themselves shift. So I think that's a really exciting place. I do think the other side of that coin, though, is the D&I negative impact that using AI in talent acquisition and talent management can have. When you read about certain programs that came out in the press over the last 3 to 4 years that actually prevented companies from hiring females, and that actually goes to the criticality of using AIs that are designed to be explainable and transparent. The title of our session today is to say there are ways you can test for bias AI, and there are ways it can show you what led to its decision, and then you kind of true up, is that a permissible generator of bias? Like I needed a PhD, and in fact I did need that, and that separated my ability to have a diverse slate, or is that unacceptable bias, like I solved for hobbies and special interests that are male dominated? Well, that's not okay. So there's a lot of opportunity, but I also think our clients talk a lot about, and even everyday people, employees and citizens are really focused on where is AI being used? Is that harming me? Not thinking about what is the opportunities it's creating. So a lot more vigilance of that HR buyer on being able to explain how they've vetted and tested, even if it's intended for good.
Thanks, Athena. So, Sultan, I might let you jump in, and I'll add some kind of additional perspective or color a little later. But I think some super interesting perspectives there.
And I think building, Athena, on what you're talking about, trying to really measure and understand bias. I think one of the things that it's important to take into account is, of course, there are many factors that an organization has to focus on, both culturally and structurally, in order to create an effective D&I program, both for their employees and their talent and everything in between. I think the one area where AI is starting to help and can really help in making that shift towards being more inclusive is by focusing on components of what you look for in your employees and candidates that are more inclusive, which are more objective, things like skills. I think it's very easy to stick to habits of looking for the same types of job titles or educational backgrounds that we searched for before and hired for before, and end up being unintentionally biased as a result, because obviously it is natural for people from certain underprivileged backgrounds to not get into those top schools or those top companies or top titles that we're searching for. And AI is starting to offer some great opportunities to be able to be more objective in searching and recruiting based on skills that are transferable and that don't have to be based on somebody's specific background. I think in terms of how organizations look at their staff and their opportunities, it's also about using AI to provide more transparency. I've spoken to many organizations that are starting to recruit more effectively for D&I, but are actually struggling to retain people with diverse backgrounds because they don't have the right opportunities and the progressions available internally or visible to candidates. Many organizations are struggling to have D&I representation at more senior levels. And AI can actually help provide more transparency, show people how people can progress through careers, what sort of upskilling or reskilling pathways are possible, and offer that clarity of how progression can work in an organization without it having to be based simply on looking at the fact that there isn't representation, therefore that couldn't change. I think at the same time, as you say, I think that there's a lot of risks. It's also tempting to start looking at quick wins and using D&I to, for example, search for people based on gender or ethnicity by inferring gender and ethnicity. And I think that's very risky and risks being very unethical. It would be very unfair to either include or exclude people or promote or not promote people based on an inaccurate inference that was done through AI. So I think we have to be very cautious around what is it that we are actually inferring and being ethical around what those choices are, as well as using the data from that to be much more transparent and visible and hold ourselves accountable for the outcomes.
Yeah, I think, Ben, just one thing to add to Sultan's point, it's not just about your intention. So it could have the best intentions. We do see, for example, some systems that let you filter, sort, select, source candidates by race and gender. I think it's just a matter of time before regulation comes out specifically about that, because there is a lot of precedence that creates a lot of challenges and is not how you're supposed to include searches, even if the intention is to help increase diversity. So really important call out from Sultan is how do we think about the governance even before there's laws out on these things to make sure the things that we're doing today don't have a negative impact tomorrow.
And just to chime in on that as well, I think the possibilities here with AI have to be harnessed for this good purpose. Humans have been doing this for a few millennia, and we're pretty biased, and we know that. And so regardless of the risks, and we have to be able to harness that power, put in guardrails, understand what that looks like. We can't simply, as an industry and as a profession, punt and say that humans need to be making these decisions manually. We need to be able to understand that more deeply, invest in the technology to do this, understand it, and be able to move forward. And I think, Sultan, your point about skills is a really great one. Thinking beyond the things we've thought of previously around titles and other markers, and thinking more about the core of what we want to solve as businesses. So I have a great deal of hope about the ability of AI to help with DEI in the long run. I know the humans are biased. I think we certainly can put the right guardrails and things in place to help machines make better decisions alongside of us.
Yeah, look, I think there's a great summation. Like, I think there's certainly the potential for technology to work with humans to remove bias. I think there's real danger in kind of quick fix solutions and, kind of using AI to try and ramp up hiring of, particular diverse groups. I think that's where the danger lies. And I think we're all very keenly aware that there is regulation that's coming here. And organizations need to be ahead of that. They need to be operating in a way right now that is ethical, and a way right now that they can explain to candidates, why they were selected or why they weren't selected. And that needs to be based on the right type of data. It can't be based on, inference of, to your point, Athena, skills that are hobbies that are associated with a certain gender than another. So I think what we're kind of dancing around here, which is super interesting, is obviously this idea of black box versus explainability. Before we get onto that, there's one more area that I wanted to just get the kind of perspective of this group before. We talked a bit about D&I as one of the primary use cases. If we think about in the broader talent life cycle, everything from internal mobility to workforce planning to sourcing, what are the things that really stand out to you as I guess touchstone moments or areas where AI can be deeply impactful? And Adam, maybe I'll come to you first on this one.
Yeah, Ben, for me, I think there are times we focus on the matching use case and how can AI help us with selection. But I think there are many other really beautiful use cases for AI in hiring. And one of the top ones for me is around personalization. And I think about Netflix and ad companies that know lots about us. And so how do we help tell the story of not only when do we communicate, but to really tell our why story to that individual and be able to guide candidate experience through being able to target messages, be able to send the right content, understand what people are saying and what signals that candidates are giving, so we can help with talent attraction. Certainly that's never been more relevant than it is in the market we are in today. But I think using AI for helping candidates understand the why and the fit within the organization through communication is a terrific use case.
Athena, maybe I'll come to you next and just kind of get, I guess, a broader thought around, what you feel either right now is effectively influenced by AI, or what has the potential across the broader life cycle to be driven or to be improved or to be made more efficient by this technology.
So I mentioned earlier, I think, the impact of different features, different requirements. It seems even when we talk about job libraries, right? We get into a copy-paste mentality, or we revamp the job architectures and libraries, but we pretty much hire the same way we did in the past versus exploring labor types, right? If this job spec was broken down into partially a perm job, and it was the most equitably inclusive version of that, like we went from 5 years experience and a PhD and a certification in whatever to 3 years experience and maybe a master's, and we took that certification requirement if we see its exclusion impact and instead went to a gig workforce for a 30, 60, 90-day stint, or had that person enroll, get certified accordingly. So even understanding that balance, I think it actually goes into not just what we require from every job and are we thinking as flexibly as we can, but also how to activate humans' potential. And this is one of the spaces we've been working in for a number of years. By a lot of systems are really good at saying, because it is easy, what you've done in the past or what you do today, you could continue to do, but not what you are capable of doing with training, exposure, mentorship, project work, teaching you, or certification, enhancing that qualification grid. And so I think it's that AI understanding of the trajectory and the D&I trade-offs and what a company has almost inventory-wise internally that they're not using. So if you think about, a lot of people are hired to do a specific job, they might come with other experience that is not part of the job they're doing today, but it's still something that's part of them and something that could be valuable to the company in the future and could lead to a different career trajectory. So I think that lexicon, as well as speaking the taxonomies of all the systems, our average client, I think, has 3 to 5 skills taxonomies. In a Beamery system, let's say a Workday system, a Degreed or a Cornerstone system, and then yet another system internally. And how do you use AI to not make you conform to one taxonomy, but rather, a la Google, be able to ask a question however you'd want to ask a question and still get good results. So I think those are the 2 key areas we're most excited about.
I think that principle that you're touching on, Athena, around not just projecting based on the past and how you can use data to actually look into potential, human potential, progression potential, is actually ultimately one of the most overlooked areas of where AI can help in general, which is infer more about the data you have and improve your data quality. to whether it's making insights that are agnostic of certain taxonomies, or being able to look at a job title and recognize that a VP in a bank is not the same thing as a VP in a startup, and that the context of where somebody worked makes a big difference. And you can't just use a one-size-fits-all sort of matching engine. Again, there are lots of parallels to how AI has been used in this way in the consumer space over the last 5-10 years. With technologies like Facebook have moved from databases to graphs, in part for that reason, to be able to extract context better out of, in their case, user behavior. And I think we're starting to see the value of AI in actually improving data understanding, data inference, data quality, and being able to be agnostic around how we actually can look at an organization's decisions around what their progression looks like, and be able to use that to provide guidance to a specific candidate in a way that is personalized to them, which comes back to the point you raised, Adam, around personalization. I think the trick to personalization starts with having enough quality of data in order to be able to create really meaningfully personal recommendations. And I think that those two things are very much two sides of a coin that we're starting to see making finally a big impact on the talent world in the same way as they have done in the consumer space.
For me, when I think about black box and white box, it really all comes down to trust. And if we think about how decisions get made about people, historically made by humans, you have some level of trust that person has a rationale for how they make a decision, whether they have their years of experience or the context to make the decision, and that is something we've accepted. When we've transitioned that to AI, to making decisions about candidates or about recommendations or other things, we have no actual reason to trust that entity. It doesn't exist with experience or context, so we don't have a reason to trust it. And so you wouldn't trust something without the ability for them to explain it to you. And so that's why that explainability is so critical, and why the white box is essential as we think about the next generation. It all comes down to the trust, and that impacts both your internal ability to influence and use AI in an organization, being able to explain to hiring managers how our systems are helping make decisions, but also to candidates, to helping them understand what their path looks like. And so I think the analogy of just being able to trust our AI, much like we would a person, to make a decision, has to be explainable for it to be adopted in any sense.
I think we've neatly transitioned onto the next topic here, which is great. Thanks, Adam. I think this is the thing that I guess has been central, a core to everything we've talked about so far, right? Whether it's using AI to increase data quality that forms a foundation for all of these use cases we've discussed around personalization and around efficiency, or whether it's being able to leverage AI for good to make decisions that are more fair, more equitable through the hiring process. I think it's purely this idea of being able to understand AI, or engage with AI almost as you would a human, to use your verbiage, Adam, that I think is so central to not just what organizations or the standards that organizations need to hold to themselves to now, but also where we're going, right, as these technologies become more powerful. Athena, I'll throw it over to you because I know this is something that you have a lot of thoughts around.
I think it's almost it almost gets lost. We hear a lot of times, how can we help our black box algorithms perform the way we design? And I think a lot of those are missing the point, or people are instead focusing on the wrong things, like our algorithms don't use race and gender, so trust them. When really what the space is moving to, or what we'd like to focus on, if we take places that the EU has just come out recently with, high risk algorithm use includes algorithms in HR. So we kind of have to take the most strict interpretation of what we all do and say, well, what does that mean? And a paramount piece of that is this notion of explainability. Well, explainability and a black box engine don't coexist. So we need to instead say, well, what does explainability mean? And for us, there are ways that you can build algorithms. It's more costly, it's more time consuming, it's often much more challenging, and will a lot of times hold back data science improvements or accuracy and predictive capabilities If they can't be explained, then, you know, in our world, we believe you can't and shouldn't do them. So what it comes down to is actually the ability that many people don't realize is, one, you can have the understanding of what features led to a recommendation. So for example, in our system, when we score a candidate, we can show every single feature that led to that person getting an A or a B or a C or a D. And then we can go into, well, are those features job related only or not? They should always be job related only. And are those features what the candidate was told they will be evaluated against? And if not, well, why were there other things that they were evaluated against that were kind of counter to their knowledge? So I think there's often a misnomer of what does it mean to be explainable, and also how far we can actually go in both explainability and even on top of explainability, we're seeing kind of a movement towards testability, auditability, and documenting of decision parameters. And just many of our clients don't know that all those things are possible, and all those things are things they can and should ask for when using an AI.
So what are your perspectives around? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dean. I'll let you finish your point.
Well, I'll jump in and say that I couldn't agree more with the importance of making every element of an AI recommendation where it's being given as transparent as possible. I think there tends to be two main flavors to this: a scenario where AI is giving an objective match or score, where it's extra important to highlight why, in part because the purpose of these types of scores is to give people options and choices, not to remove them. If you're telling somebody this is a grade A candidate or a 5-star candidate, unless you're able to highlight these are the reasons we made that recommendation based on skills, location, background, you're not giving the user an opportunity to disagree or to actually help teach the AI by saying, actually, no, I disagree for this reason, and therefore I'm going to reject this suggestion and accept this one, which also allows the AI to start learning and training and adapting to the particular user that is leveraging that AI, whether that user is a recruiter or a candidate or an employee or anybody else. And I think the reality is we have the opportunity to make AI explainable in pretty much every context. I think the where it can be more challenging to think about explainability is when you're using AI tools without knowing the underlying data that they're running on and how reliable the matching can be if you don't know if you can trust your data. So I think in addition to using explainable AI, which is key, it's also important to have a look at your own organizational choices around what skills are we actually hiring for? Do we understand, are we designing our jobs in a consistent way? Which is why I love Athena, the kind of work you mentioned you guys are doing to help with job design, because being able to do that consistently and intelligently will make it much more valuable to then use explainable AI on top of it. So I think there's really two elements to any effective white box strategy, which is absolutely necessary to make AI not only fair and unbiased, but actually work and improve. One of which is to make sure the tools you have show you why they're working so you can learn from it and teach the tools and optimize it. And the other is to make sure that the underlying data on which those tools are operating in a white box way is optimized as well.
Yeah, the one thing I'll mention there is sometimes we hear from clients that AI vendors said they can't show them the explainability because it would be exposing company IP. And I think that's something important for especially HR buyers to more boldly, know that if built with true explainability, that's not a exposing of a IP, that's just a core requirement for candidates, for corporates, for decision engines,
I don't think there's actually any scenario in which you would be prevented from making it explainable. There's no IP that is I can think of that would ever block you from actually at least highlighting where the recommendation is coming from. I think that is a dangerous position to take.
Of course.
I think it's extremely dangerous, and I think having the ability for a company to work in concert with a model to improve it over time and to add inputs and to make sure that it is working for their organization and for their hiring process in a way that is non-bias is incredibly important. I think it leads us on to the conversation around how talent teams should think about evaluating and making decisions around AI solutions. And I guess we've touched on the fact that there should be no situation in which IP protects an organization digging into the way that a vendor's solution works. But are there things that should be front of mind for organizations when they start thinking about AI? Should they think about AI in the first place, right? Should they be focused on trying to solve a business need? What's your perspective here, Adam?
For me, buyers should never go shopping for AI solutions. They should go shopping for solutions. AI may well be one of the solutions that solves it. And so I think the key there is understanding the business requirements, understanding what they're trying to solve, understanding that there are many ways to solve those business problems. AI may well be one of them, but if you go looking for AI specifically, I think what we see is companies potentially falling down a trap of getting entranced by shiny objects, where the focus really needs to be on the business problem. What will the outcomes be? How can AI really help? And really bringing it back to that sort of blocking and tackling around the business issues. And then if AI is the winner and AI can help solve that in a new and unique way, that's terrific. But really that focus has to be on the business problem.
Thanks, Adam. What's your perspective here, Athena?
Yeah, I think, as Adam mentioned, they're looking for business problem solutions. I do think, as part of some of the task force that I'm part of, World Economic Forum and UK and other US ones, I do think there tends to be this notion of how much should a talent acquisition and an HR team vet the algorithms, which I think actually falls a lot on developers of algorithms in our space should have the data, the analysis, the testing results, the internal or in concert with external experts, the expertise to help that HR leader navigate the evaluation checklist, right? So our average client, I would say, always brings in employment law, compliance, the DPO team, thinking about candidate consent, plus bias mitigation, plus ethical application. So there is this, very varied stakeholders that need to be brought in concert with that. Is this a good solution for the business goals? But it's our view that the vendor should have that material ready and all of those questions that are being asked, answers to them, or maybe using external vendors if internally you don't have that. But the client should be able to ask all those questions and get all the answers of how would a court in law audit your algorithms? What would that audit look like? Provide proof and evidence of a type of audit and a package of that. So all of those are questions the buyers should feel comfortable asking and the vendors should have results for. I think there's just not as much awareness of the extensiveness of how deep that buyer can and should go into that AI audit process. And hopefully a lot of these white papers, a lot of these task force that are being put together to really empower that HR buyer to go there and feel comfortable doing that can really make a difference. I think the last piece is just that sometimes there's systems that come in for other purposes, like being a system of record that will just turn on AI and not go through that checklist and rigorous process. When we come in a front door, we're always evaluated as a talent intelligence engine, and being an AI is part of our title, part of everything we do. So no one confuses, is this a database and not an AI? But I think one of the buyer bewares is, if you did buy a system for another purpose and it didn't go through the rigor of that AI evaluation process, anything you turn on that has AI in it should then still go through that process to de-risk using it in general.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, Athena. And I think having kind of standards, really clear standards for organizations around how to navigate these decisions is incredibly important. And there isn't necessarily the literature out there right now that helps organizations understand all of the hoops to jump through. And as you said, you can go a lot deeper than it would appear on the surface, right? And it's only by really digging deep that you understand the full potential ramifications for the solution that you're bringing on board. Sultan, what's your perspective here?
I definitely agree with Athena on the front of it needing to be rigorous, and I think there's an element of that actually ties back to what Adam was saying around there has to be a purpose that isn't just about AI. I think part of the rigor in thinking about how should we use AI is how will we think about ROI? Is the way that we're planning to use the solution going to measurably show us this is how AI is helping, this is how AI is working? And this is actually an important question because there's a lot of technologies out there that don't have a way of tracking or reporting on the outcomes that we get out of AI or being able to meaningfully capture how you should think about the return on investment. So I think that there's a few pieces that make that have to be built into either an AI first talent intelligence technology like Athena's or a very focused set of experiences that you get through AI. You should be able to demonstrate how you're reducing friction and measure the impact of that. We actually have reports that show the extent to which, for instance, candidates that are being recommended through AI are leading to certain types of outcomes, whether it's creating higher efficiencies, whether it's actually creating inclusivity. You can look at whether AI-based recommendations are leading to bias. I think these are some of the things that have to be part of the upfront decision-making and strategy, which ultimately is about what are we trying to achieve? How do we know that we're successful? And once you have that set out, of course, some of the best solutions out there are going to be AI first, but what you're buying isn't just AI.
Yeah, and look, we actually had a question from the audience, which I think kind of links in very, very neatly with what we're talking about here, which is, can a buyer place accountability fully on the vendor for this, or are they ultimately responsible for fully vetting the solution? And I think it's a difficult one, right? For everything that we've outlined. I don't know what the perspectives are of the group. Maybe Athena, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, well, first, we get asked this question a lot, which is, every vendor you work with should take full accountability for the things that they're expected to do, right? So if we say, let's say we lay out, for example, we do machine learning and we make sure it's on a fair data set, even if your own data is not even and balanced across all groups and genders. Well, in our, accountability, we need to take accountability that our machine learning is conducted fairly, and we stand by that. If we say we test algorithms for bias to make sure our AI doesn't introduce or perpetuate a bias, then we need to stand by that, and that's not on the client to govern us for the things we said we do. Honestly, it's no different than if I say I'm SOC 2 Type 2, certified. I need to follow SOC 2 processes and make sure I continue to do that. And the client shouldn't be the one, monitoring me for that compliance and that rigor that I've said during our security audit process that we follow. So I think everything that the vendors that you work with say that they take accountability for, or that they do, they need to step up and say, and we take full accountability that if we don't do that, honestly, no different than security. It's just bias and fairness is so nascent that people might not be as attuned to connecting those dots, but we see them as very connected.
So Sultan, I'll let you jump in and kind of add any perspectives to that, and then we have a couple more questions from the audience that we can dig into, which is super. So thanks everyone who submitted those.
Well, I think I completely agree with Athena's point. I think the only thing I'd add is most companies will have broader principles around their approach to compliance and ethics, and I think it's important to take those into account when looking at any function, whether it's talent or people or any technology, because there are ways of determining what are we comfortable with as a company that should go deeper than just one particular area or tool. And in that regard, the responsibilities on both sides. Obviously, vendors have to be transparent and open about what their technologies are doing and how they're built, and also in those technologies themselves, like we discussed earlier, responsible when vendors build white box, because that creates enough explainability for that to be transparent in every single interaction that you have with the AI. But I think ultimately the organizations that roll out these things have to take into account what are we using it for, and how we communicate it to the people that are impacted by this AI, how it's used. There's increasing expectations that if you're, as Athena said earlier, in the EU, if you're using AI inside talent processes or HR processes, you should be able to actually explain that to the actual candidates and employees themselves, so they know how algorithms are being used. And I think those are decisions that have to be made by organizations as well as by vendors together.
I'll take a real hard agreement with Athena and Sultan that vendors should do what they say they're going to do, and they should act ethically. I think at the same time, buyers have to be very aware of who they're partnering with, what the ethics and standards of those organizations are. Certainly, who's accountable depends a lot on what the situation is, but certainly government regulators, executives in your own organization, if you introduce an AI solution that's not well vetted and ends up having bias or other claims, the accountability is going to be on the team that helped select that. So I think it's not simply as simple as our AI ended up being biased and go talk to that vendor. That's certainly not going to be delegable. So I think it is important that vendors do that. They say what they'll do, but there is an important point of selecting the right partner, asking the right questions in a selection process where these important decisions are being made.
So another question here, and this is, I mean, anyone who's walked the floor of an HR conference recently, or I guess I should say pre-COVID, so not that recently, will see that AI as a term is probably something you could find in almost every booth. I think for a buyer, it's tough to stay ahead and understand how all these new technologies, new solutions play together. Do you have any recommendations for effective ways of doing that, and effective ways of, I guess, sorting through, all of these different messages around AI, kind of sifting through the buzzword soup, as it were? Adam, any perspective there?
Yeah, I hate to come back to it, but it really comes back to the business challenge that you're trying to solve. Whether someone, I make the joke that there was a year, maybe 2016 or 17, where everyone just crossed off big data off of their signs at the conferences and put AI in it, but didn't change the software. But in many ways, it's not particularly important what it's called. It's important what it does and how it affects your business. And so either way, it's important to understand the business problem, and of course understand the risks that come with technology, even things that wouldn't be classified as AI by the data scientist. And so I think the principles around vetting technology really stand as they are, with the added caveat of being sure that we control for risk that might be introduced by AI.
One thing just to mention to Adam's point is, one of the reasons I love Sultan and Adam and both of your companies is because we all take the approach of, we're not generalists and masters of none. We're actually, very focused on what it is each of us do, and building AI in our areas and our cones of expertise. I think when you think about AI, especially when you think of Adam and Paradox conversational, and Beamery in talent attraction, nurturing, engagement, and messaging, and in what we do in evaluation and surfacing and business readiness, I think you get into a notion of, you would never have a generalist physician operate on your heart. You'd go to a cardiologist. And really, when you think about AI, it should be no different, especially if you're working in complex business problems that you need solved, or areas that could have risks, or just generally AI for HR, which is deemed in some places now to be classified as high risk. So it's that view, and then I think it's up to us as vendors to seamlessly connect our systems actually Beamery and Paradox and Hiredscore all have connected APIs native built for each of our systems, where I do think it is now a vendor responsibility to make it as easy as possible for a client to stitch together that best of breed capability. But that best of breed responsibility of AI vendors is I think what will be the differentiator as we go forward.
Sultan, I'll let you add any closing thoughts to that question.
I mean, my closing thought would be building on what Athena just said around how things interact. I think definitely important and responsible for vendors to help buyers understand the implications of what the broader relationship will be with their existing technologies, existing tools. I think it is obviously something that is increasingly not just an ad hoc decision, but has to be embedded in a broader talent and data strategy. You know, one of the reasons that, again, sharing Athena's thoughts, I'm such a fan of both Hiredscore and Paradox, is because of the transparent approach of both of your organizations and the transparent approach you take, just as we do, with educating our buyers on how things fit together and how vendors work together and how that has to be part of the broader decision making that you're putting in place. So really been a pleasure speaking with two of our favorite companies on a topic that we're clearly so aligned on.
It certainly has. It certainly has, and I think some really fantastic perspectives shared throughout this conversation. I just have two more questions and see if I can sort of squeeze in with the time that we have. So one, and I think this kind of dovetails with a lot of the discussion so far already. But you know, if you're considering an AI solution to support one of the different use cases that we've already talked about, whether it's personalization, whether it's efficiency, etc., how do you assess whether you are ready for that type of solution? And obviously it ties in with business challenges, and are you solving the right one? Are there any fundamental kind of building blocks that you need to solve for before you can even think about this? And so maybe I'll come to you first here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the reality is that everybody can be ready for leveraging some element of AI if they approach that dialogue in the way that Athena and Adam have been talking about, which is start with actually asking the right questions around what are we trying to do and assessing the state of our data, the state of our experiences, and where we're actually trying to apply these solutions. And if you're speaking to the right vendors, they will help you navigate the right discussions and discovery to figure out where do you start. And I think that's the real question. It's less about whether your organization is ready to leverage AI. Every organization is to some extent. It's about what is the maturity of some of your systems and data in order for you to start in a manner that is going to deliver results that are ethical, unbiased, and deliver the outcomes that you're looking for. And that includes preparing your users and stakeholders. One of the important things about leveraging AI is it should be creating new habits and changing behaviors. And that isn't just about technology. That's about preparing your stakeholders, your users, especially if you have recruiters and HR people, on what it means in terms of what they get to stop doing and what they get to start doing, and how they can think about leveraging some of the personalization that Adam talked about earlier. I think that it's, when applied to the context of experiences for candidates and employees, it should be very simple. You should be able to just start creating things that are more personalized, and if it's working well, people might not even notice. They just get a better experience than they did before. But you still have to be able to get ready to explain to candidates if algorithms are going to be impacting their decisions. So your maturity as an organization about being able to put in place some of those processes is part of the process of deploying ethical white box AI.
Athena, Adam, I'll let you add to that if there's anything that you think is relevant.
Ben, one thing I'd mention to that is, we get asked this a lot by actually I think some of the most sophisticated buyers, which is, where do you recommend we start? And I love that question because it lets us actually highlight, for example, where do we, without even having to see your data, do we have confidence that no matter what that data looks like, this will work and it will treat everyone fairly and no one will be at a detriment because of data quality or data fill-in? And great example is the things every person who applies already submits information about them as a candidate related to the job. So that's not a change or a process or something new you have to have. Maybe you need to modify the consent form, but you already have the building blocks in place for us to begin there, versus other places like with talent management are, making sure that if we're working on HCM data or with learning and training data, we're highlighting back for you. So one of the things we start to do with clients is map out where do we not even need to look at the data to know where to begin, versus where do we want to do a study on the data first to show coverage, quality, and simulation of whom would get different treatment, or where would there be a discrepancy for now. And then maybe we sit on those business cases until that data set reaches a higher coverage, or you give people the option to fill that in by letting them know what's on the other side of if they fill that in. So I think that connects to, I think, the complexity of business problems we'll able to start solving, or the places where the AI goes. Some of that should have a diagnostic, especially if you feel not confident about your data, or it involves, as Sultan mentioned, a new process in place. Then maybe we want to wait with the AI until that new process is launched, or that data only relies on system automatically generated data, not people optional fill-in data for now, and we build that over time.
Adam, I'll let you bring us home. I don't think we have time for another question, but please, anything else to add here for the audience?
Really, just to reiterate those points by Sultan and Athena, is everyone's ready depending on where you are, and I think not having to think about solving the whole problem and creating an autonomous hiring machine on the first day, understanding where you are and just taking the first step, and everyone's ready to take one step forward, and so thinking about how your organization can best do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think this is exactly the right framing for this. It's a journey, and taking the right first step is more important than trying to accelerate to the finish line as soon as you can. And I think if folks keep that in mind, then they'll make the right decisions. And if they bear in mind all the fantastic advice that's been shared throughout this session, and they're certainly going to be better placed to onboard the right technology, or or not, right, if it's not the thing that solves the business problem. So thank you everyone for coming to the session. A huge thank you to our three wonderful panelists, and for everyone for logging in. Reminder that obviously we'll be sharing recordings with everyone who was able to attend and who wasn't, and obviously if you haven't attended so if you haven't registered for upcoming sessions for this webinar series, please do. But yeah, a huge thank you to everyone once more, and yeah, we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.
Thank you all.